Hello and welcome to my channel. Today it's going to be a very radically different video from what you probably expect from my channel. Today I'm going to show you a quite a radically different framework of understanding self-improvement, which is having parallels between politics and self-improvement. And how does that example apply to self-improvement? I will explain very shortly. Before starting the video, there's a free mental transformation PDF that you can get down in the description. And now we can get on with it. So professionally, I'm not actually a self-improvement YouTuber, believe it or not, even though I make videos about that specific topic. My IRL work has to do with politics, policy research, geopolitical events, etc. at my own university, which I graduated. And so when analyzing states and countries, and when I was studying politics as well at the university, I found out that there are many similarities between different aspects of self-improvement and how a country functions. And so I came up with a bit of a framework, a bit of an idea to have these parallels between different aspects of mental transformation and different functions of a state, which can help us to understand the functions of the mind a little bit more. So I have 5 different categories that I will explain, which are correspondent to a specific aspect of self-improvement that I will explain why exactly those correlations I have made, and also how does this practically apply to your self-transformation. The first category is the most core one to how a state functions in general, which is a constitution. So a constitution in a country has to do with what kind of country it is, what kind of institutions does it have, how does it work, what is it based on, etc. And corresponding to what constitution is, we are going to link it to a self-image, because both work in a very similar manner. Your self-image determines what kind of person you are. It determines what kind of actions you take, what kind of habits you do, what kind of idea do you have about your future, right? And how you interpret your past. With Constitution, it is exactly the same, right? The Constitution lays the foundations to how a country should be functioning, how a country should be built. And so does your self-image, sets a foundation to how you function yourself and what kind of foundation you create for your future self, right? And so when you change the constitution, the whole matters of the state also change. And as for self-image, if you change your self-image, of course, naturally you change everything that is correspondent to that self-image. It can be habits, it can be thinking, it can be how you deal with different problems and matters, etc. So the first one was constitution and self-image. We move on next to judiciary slash the government. I use this interchangeably simply because I have connected it to the ego. Why is that the case? Usually, the role of the government and the judiciary is to preserve itself, right? One preserves the other, and usually it is preserved through a constitution. So technically, the role of the government is to preserve the constitution, right? Follow the rules and the laws. The reason I connected it to the ego is because the main point of your ego is to challenge everything that can be transformative and to preserve the status quo of your own self, which means that your ego is very negative, is very against you having any radical changes happen to your self-image, right, to your self-being. This is why governments are, if it's a corrupt government, especially uses judiciary to enforce the constitutional norms onto the people to preserve their own power. This is the same with the ego. Ego is trying to preserve its own power and its own dominion over you so that there won't be any radical changes that can harm ego's existence. Which moves us to the next section, which is the state. And the state is correlated to habits. And the reason is there's a difference between what a government is and what a state is. A government is a body that governs the state. And the state is how a country functions effectively, right? What does country do? How does it act? Is done by the government, which is your habits. So we have the constitution, judiciary government, and the habits, which is your self image is preserved by the government, which is the ego, and through that self image and the government, your habits are shown, right? You act in a certain way. Your ego makes you act a certain way. Your self image about yourself makes you act in a certain way, right? Which most of the time is very self harming because it is not you consciously deciding to watch pornography or eat junk food. These are very impulsive decisions that you make simply because your ego and your self identity is very much controlled, not by you, by your conscious self, but by the unconscious forces, which is your self image and your ego most of the time. So this is why the state is correlated to your habits, because habits you do are governed usually by your unconscious forces rather than the conscious ones. Which our goal is to change that, of course, but we'll get to the reason and the goal later. Next one is the citizens, right? The people of the country who want to improve the quality of their lives. Okay, in most countries around the world, people just want change, and change has to be mostly positive, at least. In this case, the conscious mind is you. You represent the people. Now, it is a bit too broad because people want different things, but this is where self interest comes in, right? Because you represent the majority in this case, and majority want positive change for the country to be had. This is a bit of a dangerous zone because how you manage to confront change can depend on what kind of approach you have. Do you want a revolutionary approach, which is through overthrowing the government and radically transforming your self image, or is it through gradual, slow steps? One is much safer than the other, and one is much less riskier than the other, but at the same time, one is much more effective than the other, and I can also explain which one of those is specifically. And the last one that you have to know is a term called raison d'etat, or reason of state. Raison d'etat, or reason of state, reasons why does state takes actions, right? Why do the governments take specific actions? So effectively, purpose. So it is exactly the same. Reason of state is the exact same thing as purpose because states have purpose, and there is a reason to what purpose does a state and a country does do something. It is the same with you, right? You have to have a certain purpose, a certain reason why you want to change, why you want to achieve a specific goal. So this is what it is. Now, considering all of these factors, how do these things work together, and what kind of influence can one have over the other, and how does correlate that to self-improvement? In most cases, in most countries, the power comes from the people. So you the conscious self, have the power over yourself, effectively, in your unconscious mind. But usually there is a huge discrepancy between what you, the conscious you, want and what does the unconscious self wants, right? This is where all the self-improvement happens, effectively, which is that you, the conscious self, are trying to improve yourself, and you have this huge opposition by your unconscious self and your self-image to have any radical changes. So this is what happens here. People of the country want to change, but they have huge opposition from the government that doesn't want to change, that wants to preserve its power, and so it uses its constitution as a defensive force. In order for a country to have any meaningful change, we have to force a government to change the constitution and change the rules of the game, rules of the country, in order for that country to become a much better place to live in. Same in your self-improvement, you have to force your ego, right? Or get over your ego. This is something I talk about all the time. You, the conscious self, has to allow ego to step aside. You have to overcome your ego, put aside your ego, to directly change the mental programming and self-image you have about yourself. Is it easy? Hell no, it's not easy, because as it's kind of the similar situation as in the country of the people and also your self-image, right? And For you to know what kind of change you have to make, you have to have your raison d'etre, or state of purpose of the state, or the purpose, your own purpose. What do you want to change into, and why do you want to change into whatever you want? So this is a multi-layered process, and even though I explained this in a bit of a difficult manner, usually in self-improvement this process happens very automatically, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, but usually, just like the states, you evolve through time. And if you stagnate, then you are really just moving backwards, right? Because if a country stagnates economically, politically, institutionally, usually it leads to reversal of all the progress that has been made in that country, or at least in situation getting just slightly worse every day than it used to be. It is same with you. If you're not progressing forward, then you are definitely moving backwards in some capacity, right? There is no such thing as complete stagnation in self-improvement and in the terms of the country's situation. So what can lead to a meaningful change in a country and in self-improvement as well? Usually, since the power comes from the people, you, the conscious person, has to allow yourself and your ego to reprogram the mind, which is to change your self image into something that is more viable for you and something that equals to improved quality of life. Because usually our raison d'etre usually is to have increased quality of life, right? So we want to live better, we want to have better enjoyment of our things. And same as in the country, people want to have better economic opportunities, better chances at satisfying their needs, and same with you in this case as well. And there are many ways to do it, obviously. One way to do it is to force the ego or force the government to change the constitution, right? So put your ego aside to allow your mind to be reprogrammed, and you have to do it consciously as well. The other way is to completely remove the ego and rewrite the code from top to bottom, which is effectively equal to revolution. But there's dangers to that, and I will explain what those dangers are. And one process is much slower, the other process is much quicker. Now, the slower process, which is to put your ego aside every single time and let it give concessions to reform, can lead to slower progress, but a surefire way of keeping that progress and change intact. While the revolutionary way, which is to completely put your ego aside and completely change your mental state, has to be done in a very coordinated manner, simply because revolutions, and just like radical transformations, can either be a force for good or force for chaos, which can lead to an identity crisis in a person. Positive radical transformation within you has already probably happened anyway. If you're watching this type of videos, you are already on your self-improvement journey, which means that you have started to radically rewrite your code in your brain to change into a person that is more desirable and has an increased quality of life. But some people, when they have this kind of moment, they can usually lead to even bigger depression, which is the chaos and anarchy that I was talking about when it comes to the state. But if we have to consider the fact that you did it successfully, then you have to make subsequent reforms that can align with that goal, with the reason of state. Effectively, what I'm trying to get here is that your self-improvement and the functioning of the countries and politics and how politics work within a country is very similar to each other in more ways than one. And by analyzing these 5 categories, from my perspective, I have managed to actually increase my awareness in my self-improvement and how the processes work in my brain when a person is undergoing a self-transformation, right? Now, this is a very radical idea and very radical parallels that I have just made. It might work, it might not work. Let me know in the comments below about that. But that was effectively what I want to tell you today, is that the function of the state is a very similar to a human's mind and mind on self-transformation, and also your self-improvement journey is very similar to how a country reforms into being a better or a worse version of itself. There's also another idea that I have made up, which is the economics of self-improvement, which I'm also going to explain, which has to do more on the habitual side of self-improvement and how those kind of things affect us and our well-being which if you're interested, I'm going to make a video about that, or not. I'm still going to make a video about it because I personally find it very intriguing and very interesting. And so if you want to start rewriting your constitution or your self-image from today, then there is a free PDF you can get down the description and start your rewriting journey. And for now, I will see you later, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a good day.